Greetings, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. Today, we are going to be discussing going wireless for a holiday service. But before we get into that, just a few items of housekeeping. First of all, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. Usually takes us about a week or so to get it edited and ready, but once it is, it will be available at shure.com/webinars. Once again, that's shure.com/webinars. And that is a great place to go to see all of our upcoming webinar sessions and then all of our other past archives. We have a lot of great webinars from the past over a lot of great audio topics, so please feel free to go there, peruse, and learn a little bit more about audio. Second of all, as we go through the session today, if you have any questions, please type those into the questions section. We will be holding on questions until the end, but type in those questions, be patient, and we will answer as many as we have time for at the end of the session. So, speaking of the session, let's talk about a little about what we're going to be discussing today. First of all, we are joined by two very, very special guests. Mac Brown and Josh Webster are going to be giving us some excellent information and expertise, and they're going to be moderated by our Shure associate, Michael Moore. And this is a look at today's agenda. We're going to first get to know our presenters a little bit more. Then we're going to talk about setting up for success on your approach and your operations. We'll talk about holiday planning, supporting the celebration, and the wireless solutions from Shure, and then we'll dive into those Q&As. But before we get into that, let's get interactive. Everybody likes to take a poll, so I'm going to launch a poll here. We want to know a little bit more about you. So please take a moment and select if you are you have a paid position, if you're a volunteer, or if you're something else. We'd like to know who you are a little bit more. And while those poll questions are going, Michael, why don't you give us a little bit of background on our special guests today and how you know them?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheryl. For folks, if we've not yet met, Michael Moore with Shure in the Southeast as industry relations, and I've had the great opportunity over the past several years as a part of my role to work directly with some of the House of Worship folks in the Southeast part of the United States. And so how I was lucky enough to meet these two gentlemen today that you're going to hear from was several years ago, actually back around 2016, I believe it was, where they graciously hosted an advanced wireless seminar for us in the greater Houston area when a location had fallen through. And they also have been in touch with us for Axient digital beta testing as well. But it's just been a great opportunity to meet these folks, talk to them, and then really just kind of learn what they do, how they've honed their craft over the years. And so really when we talk about, how we set up for wireless or even wired product for holiday services, we felt that it would be a better opportunity and experience for those who have attended today to take a listen to folks that are in the trenches, so to speak, every day of the year. So Cheryl, just want to kick it back to you. How's the poll going?
Poll is looking good. Looks like we have about 80%. So I'm going to go ahead and close it so we can share the results here. So it looks like we have a lot of volunteers, a lot of probably just people looking to increase their sort of event and wireless knowledge, and then a few paid technical position people. So we want to thank you all for joining us and taking that poll. And with that, I think we'll get back to the presentation here. 1 second, I have to figure out how to do that. All right, there we go.
Mac and Josh, that was a lot of the folks from Second Baptist, right? It was a required attendance today.
It is mandatory. No.
All right, I'm going to leave it up to you, gentlemen, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. So we're going to kick this off with the first introduction. Mac, if you would, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do for Second Baptist.
Hi, so my name is Mac Brown, and my current role for Second Baptist is I am the Chief of Staff for the technical team. So it's the audio, video, lighting department for all 6 of our campuses. I'm primarily at our main campus here at Woodway, which is kind of central Houston, and I am also the global director of audio. So anything that goes wrong, I take the blame for and make sure the guys don't feel the heat for it. That's primarily what I do. And my boss is the global technical director. His name is Jeremy Beatles. So he and I kind of tag team on a lot of projects that we have here at Second Baptist.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for co-hosting. Certainly appreciate it. And Josh Webster.
I have been the front of house mix engineer at the Woodway campus for about 5 years now, and about 10 years of monitors before that. So I have been through just about everything that a church can go through.
By the way, that was planned just to show you how well he works under pressure.
Yeah.
So no worries. Well, awesome. Well, again, thank you, Josh, for being here with us as well. For folks that may not be familiar, we just want to take a minute here, and Mac or Josh, if you jump in and just kind of give us kind of the quick rundown of Second Baptist, of kind of who you are, where you're located, and just kind of fill folks in for the folks that may not be familiar with you all.
Sure. Second Baptist Church, we're located in Houston, Texas, and what you see on the screen is one of our locations. We have a full-time school also, birth through 12th grade. So a lot of those buildings are school buildings also. We have a worship center in that bottom right corner. That room seats just over 4,000 people. It's 2 balconies, and that's where Josh and I live most weekends and most days of the week for our worship services. We have 6 campuses across the Houston area. Various sizes. Some of our rooms are in the round, which can be a different challenge audio-wise, but all of them have super talented technicians who run audio, video, and lighting at each campus that we work with every week.
Very cool. And fun fact of the day, I hear the Woodway campus has the largest all-pipe Rogers organ ever built, with 192 stops and 10,412 pipes, as one of the largest organs in the world.
And no fader to control the volume.
There you go. For folks that have organs, you're not the only ones that struggle.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of that, we kind of wanted we want to make sure that everybody here on the call, for folks that may not be in a church of that size, to smaller churches, really, which we will find out as well here in a second. But we just want to make sure that we really wrap this discussion to make sure that you understand about the things that are the fundamentals that we learned today. Pardon me, and as well as the fundamentals that Mac and Josh use every day with their teams and their technology, that hopefully this is something that you don't have to be from a large church, or you don't have to have $1 million budget in order to be able to glean a few points off this. And I know Mac and Josh, you guys have also worked and consulted with churches of all sizes as well.
Sure.
Correct.
So one of the questions as well, I think it's almost poll time, isn't it, Cheryl? We want to ask a quick question as a tech question. Again, keep you all engaged. Want to talk about wireless in the service and just channels of wireless that you use during the service, just to get a feel of folks out there, big or small. There's no correct answer. Just what you all use on a weekly basis, and this kind of helps us as well understand and temper the conversation as we go forward of what folks are comfortable with, what you're not comfortable with. And it looks like answers are coming in. So speaking of that, Josh, how many channels of wireless do you average on a weekend?
So our inventory includes 20 channels of wireless mics, and then 14 channels of wireless in-ears. And we're sort of limited by white space in our room at this point. We have a pretty tough RF environment in Houston, especially where our campus is located. But we typically will use all but a few of those in a given week. So call it 15 to 20 channels of mics and the same number of ears you use every week.
Yeah. So that's a pretty healthy channel count then on a weekly basis then, looks like, for most folks. Well, it looks like we've got about 66% or so on the vote.
You want me to close that one out?
Why not, Cheryl?
All right, let's see the results.
All right. So we're kind of spread there pretty evenly across channel counts there. So no wireless to a few to several. Very cool. Well, that's good to know. So hopefully some of this will help folks prepare for folks that need more wireless or need more product in general. We're hoping that some of this information too, as we speak to some of the processes, personnel, hopefully will help temper some of your conversations with some of your teams as well. So want to get into just set up for success, what's in place year round. We know that this kind of was like a holiday, once a year type thing, but I'm thinking that there's a whole lot of stuff that Mac, that you and your team do on a weekly basis to help prepare yourselves structure wise and process wise to make sure that your communications and the way that you all operate are preparing you all year long for those large events. And if you wouldn't mind, just kind of give us a little bit of insight here, kind of the three pillars here, start with production and tech staff, and just things that you do to help prepare your team on a weekly basis, and then kind of how that folds out into having you being prepared for the larger events.
Sure. On a weekly basis, we have a staff meeting once a week, and it's anywhere from 15 minutes to maybe an hour, depending on what events we have going on for the week that we're in, plus the week that's coming up or months down the road. And what I typically do is put together like a monthly calendar of all the events. That includes weddings, funerals, school events, because our school does quite a few productions a year, so it helps our team to be on the same page. And then also once a week, I have a Zoom meeting with our campus production managers so that we're all on the same page with the larger scale deals that are going on when it comes to Easter, purchasing equipment, staffing deals, or just touching base once a week in Zoom or actually we use Teams, but Teams helps us get those things done really efficiently. And we talk through inventory, what needs to be repaired, what's out for repair, what's coming back, and that helps us stay on the same page for everything that we have coming up. And then if something needs to be repaired or tested, we leave that to Josh. Our rule is if Josh Webster can't break it, then we typically buy it.
And when you're in regards to your full-time staff versus volunteer staff, which I know I grew up in a very small church myself on I think I started on a PV XR600 box mixer. So obviously full-time staff was definitely not in the budget for a paid position. But when you've, in regards to the number of events that you do, volunteers to full-time, do you have a ratio of folks that you've got or a number of volunteers to full-time staff?
I don't know the ratio. So volunteers, we have on a given weekend, we'll have probably across all 6 campuses, anywhere between 40 and 50 volunteers in a tech position, and we'll have about 30 to 40 paid people because of we've got camera operators, audio is in front of house, broadcast of a monitor position, lighting guys. So it's probably about 50-50.
Okay. And so in regards to the volunteers as well, and just communication with them, assume that's kind of an important part of that as well, to make sure that they're also in that knowledge base so that they feel prepared when they show up for the event, no matter what day of the week it is, that they've got the same knowledge that the full-time staff does.
Correct. So we use our weekly rehearsals as a training time for our volunteers at each campus, and sometimes it's learned on the fly on Sunday morning if somebody wants to shadow a camera op or sit in our production room with our team that's running Pro Presenter or running slides. And it's an ongoing training process, and then we get them in a rotation as soon as we possibly can so they can get their feet wet and know and feel the pressure that we feel as the paid guys who are the stewards over a lot of the equipment that we have.
Yeah, very cool. Now, I know that there's always sometimes a little bit of a dynamic with the technical arts team and sometimes creative arts. How is that interaction as well, that in order to communicate of what's going on, preparing, obviously there's the technical information of, hey, they need this, but that they need this conversation to, this is how we all work together to accomplish the creative side with the technical side. How do you guys work with your creative team to keep communication open and build a good, strong relationship so that there's that trust there, as well as just open understanding of what you need and what they need, and how that helps keep the team strong?
Well, trust is a big part of that, and we meet with our creative arts team weekly also. We just talk through the order of worship for the week, and it can be a 10-minute conversation, or it can be an hour conversation also. So based on what their needs are, we give them information on what we have in place as far as equipment and what we can or can't do if we need to rent, and we'll talk through the budget with that. But it's a weekly meeting with our worship and creative arts team, and it's also building trust, like that being the most important thing with worship is the tech team and the worship team being on the same page. And we don't always agree, but we do our best to accomplish the goal and get the goal accomplished as best we can.
Okay. Is there anything or a piece of advice when working with a worship director or someone in that position to share for folks that may be trying to build that bridge of trust?
I think becoming friends with them helps out a lot, and just having one-on-one meetings to kind of let them know, hey, here's the goal. We all want the same goal, and we don't want the congregation to suffer our personal agendas or anything like that. So trying to become friends with them, helping them understand, don't talk over their head when it comes to tech, because it's very easy for us to do, because a lot of things for us are very black and white. Well, if you want a singer to be in the balcony, we need a wireless microphone, we need wireless ears, how we're going to get the antennas to talk, and they just want the creative part for it to happen. So walking them through the room kind of helps, and just let them know, like, hey, here's some limitations that we have, but we can accomplish this goal if we change this small thing to get it done. And most times that works, sometimes it doesn't, and we try our best to accomplish the goal.
Very cool.
I would just add, if I can, I think it's important to explicitly communicate that you are there to enable their vision. Not that it's a compromise between your vision and their vision, but that is why you are here, is to serve their performance. And once you can convince them that that's true, you're on the same team.
Awesome. Great advice on that. I think sometimes we lose that focus and the frustration of they're asking for the sun and the moon, and they don't understand what they're really asking for until you have that calm, collected conversation of, if we could do it, we would, but.
Yeah, and don't take it personal, because most times it isn't personal. It's just a lack of understanding on both sides. And once you get to that point where we understand what we can and can't do, or here's a way we can do it, it may cost some money, or let's plan this out in the future, that helps everybody get the goal accomplished.
Very cool. That is sage advice. Now, last little piece that we wanted to touch on, leadership and administration. I know that in a church of your size, you've got a lot of folks that are looking over a lot of technology because you do have a scaled facilities with a lot of technology that needs to be properly managed. A lot of times for folks that might be in smaller facilities or just less technology, or a single campus setup, what are things that you guys do to help encourage and build that relationship among the leadership and administration to communicate, similar like with the creative arts team, communicating what your needs are to leadership, to let them know that these are things that that are needed, or things that need to be budgeted for. How do you go about with those communications?
We try to meet with them regularly, and we just don't take the approach that the sky is falling. We know that gear will die at some point, and we try to communicate, hey, this piece of gear we think will last 5 to 10 years. We have 5 to 10 years of life left, so we can plan 3 years from now to start budgeting for it versus, hey, we got to spend $20,000 or $100,000 tomorrow because somebody says it. And so we talk to a lot of our manufacturers and our vendors across Houston area and across the nation about where trends are going, where trends are leading, and then we put together a real plan 3 years, 5 years, 10 years out, what it looks like for the gear and how the gear is going to last. And that a lot of that is based on the support that the manufacturers have, because in the church industry, we know we're not getting the money back, whereas a rental house, they're buying it, renting it out, and getting the money back. So we have to buy it knowing this piece of gear needs to last 10 years, 5 years when it's the big ticket items. And building trust with them is great. They've empowered us to make a lot of decisions, and they trust us, and we have to stand behind it. So we can't spend money and then all of a sudden say, well, we were wrong, this doesn't work, so we need to go back and spend more money, because then you lose the trust. So, and it's hit or miss. We haven't done that often. We've messed up a few times, but we do our best to do our research and get it right. And
Cool.
That's where I lean on Josh and our other technical directors when we all put our heads together about what's the next phase, or what we're going to do, and how we're going to be entrusted with the church's money to buy the right equipment that's going to last.
Very cool. Makes sense. We would be remiss if we didn't have a couple live action shots that we're going to kick to, just to kind of look at the room sizes and systems. I believe it's on the next slide there, that kind of talks to kind of the number of services, the types of services. And so you guys do, again, just kind of frame this. You guys still have a more traditional service, as well as, I believe, when I was there, saw some signage for like Spanish services, as well as a more contemporary service. So like you said, you've got 6 campuses doing youth events, big and small events. And I know that you all from working with you in the past have always been very cognizant of being good stewards of the financials and working with what you can. So really, when you're looking at this, when you look at shows like this, how far out in advance do you start planning for, say, events like this that you may have, or your larger events?
So the event on the screen right now is what we call our beach retreat. It's our summer camp for our high school and JI kids. And that happens every year in June, and we start meeting about it in July of the year before for what we're going to do. So we in this preliminary meetings about just small things like how many kids we're going to take, or how many can we take, and then we get into the nitty-gritty as the months go on about gear, size of the band, size of the room, what kind of PA we're using, what gear we're going to rent. And so we try our best to meet about this a year out in advance. And then for our Christmas and our Easter programs, our Christmas show, we'll meet early June, right before beach retreat. We'll have a quick meeting about that, and then come August, we're knee deep in the script, gear, what we need. And we talk about, if there's a violinist who now isn't playing with the orchestra but has to come out on the stage, when it changes up, miking the person, in-ears, does it take in-ears away from somebody else? Is it going to share a mix? Is it just part of a song? So we get that detailed about something like that. Or we say, hey, this person can be wired. If it's doing a transition piece, we can just have them on a wired mic and wired ears for the one moment. So we talk through those details as far out in advance as we possibly can. But we have an army of guys who help us get this all together.
Very cool. That looks like an impressive event. We have another quick interactive poll here, which is just to find out from everybody else. We just heard Mac talk about how far out they plan for holiday shows. Just want to ask folks that are tuned into the webinar, kind of what your average length of time for planning for a lot of these shows, and understanding that it may be not in your control based on when someone allows, somebody finally gets the idea together and slingshots it at you and says, hey, we got a month to do it, or maybe folks are 6 months out or a year out. But looks like answers are coming in here as well. So Josh, anything to add to that part of it in the planning for some of those events, or any last minute war stories?
Well, I would add that these big events, especially for us, Beach Retreat being off campus and outside of everyone's kind of normal operating procedures, we view as a great opportunity to sort of test out new concepts for production or for the way that we manage things technically. We may try out some new technology. And then those things will eventually trickle down to week use in the church. But because we're renting extra things and we're kind of trying to push the envelope in these events, it's a good opportunity to kind of stretch in every direction for the team.
Makes sense. That's a a good opportunity when you're outside your normal setup to think about leveraging environments like that. Cheryl, looks like I think we're at about so we are just running like even Steven out here on this poll. So yeah, it looks like we've got some big and some small, and maybe some of this too is just dependent on the event and event size, as well as maybe just what is being interacted with as well, technology wise. So good information there. Next thing we do want to talk about as we kind of transition into the more technical side is just kind of the inventory and assessing inventory. And I think you kind of covered this with some of your previous conversations about the ideas that you kind of have a blank slate with events like that, to where you can go in and figure out and maybe test and try new product and maybe try different approaches to it. But you had mentioned too about repair and things like that. So when you do look at inventory for these larger events, when you're having to either make a decision to maybe rent for these larger events, which some folks may not have a rental house close to them to be able to do it, and maybe it makes more sense to budget for a purchase of that. In your shoes, how do you make those decisions on budget to either purchase versus a rent? And then when you look at all of that inventory, any comments on, do you borrow things from other rooms, other campuses, things like that, in order to do some of these larger events?
When it comes to some of the larger events on campus, we tend to rent for the event, because typically the other rooms may be used at the same time, or at least during the rehearsal time. So it's very difficult to borrow from those rooms. But there are times when we have events in those other rooms where we'll just rent to supplement what we already have in the room. We just had 2 weeks ago, we had 2 different productions going on at the same time, one on campus, one off campus. And the one on campus, we just rented more mics and more receivers to supplement what was already in the room, instead of renting more and spending more money when we didn't have to. We just figured out, hey, we know this gear will work. We had some OUHFR, just rented some ULXD to accommodate the necessity for what was being asked for that production. When it comes to taking things outside of our worship rooms, we've just built in, if it's in our worship center, we don't take it out for outdoor events. But some churches don't have that option. So when I'm helping them, I try to get them to build their system to be more modular. So if it does have to leave their main room, it's more in a rack case. You can take it out very easily, set it up outside. Maybe they can purchase some extra antennas versus buying a bunch of extra wireless, which antennas are a little cheaper, and they can keep that modular, so it can be moved from room to room or off campus or for an outside event, because it may just be a 10-minute event and it's not worth renting something. They can just pull a device, just make sure that it's very easy to be put back in a room and test it to work for Sunday, because most of us are in that world where Sunday is still the most important part. So you don't get the excuse of, well, we took it out Saturday and it worked, and now it doesn't work today. And
Yeah.
it's the pastor's channel. That's like, that excuse just doesn't fly. So if you can get it to be built modular and have some rack cases where you can unplug a few cables, take it outside and use it, or if you have the budget, I love renting because I don't have to worry about the maintenance of it when it goes away. So when we do rent, and we still try to be wise with the church's money. Just the way our system is set up, it's not easy for any of our gear to be taken out of our main worship center. And our other rooms, those rooms are a little bit more modular, where we can grab an in-ear rack, take it from our sanctuary and into our high school room if there's a larger event. And then as far as the other campuses, they kind of run the same way when it comes to renting or moving from room to room. It's a case-by-case basis.
Yeah. I was going to say, in some of those smaller churches that you mentioned, because I know that a small church that I get the opportunity to volunteer from time to time as needed, budget is usually not there. You've got to work with what you've got, and so sometimes you budget to purchase things. Just because the rental side of it, they actually need to actually replace the gear. And is there any advice that when as you or Josh are consulting with smaller churches that don't have a larger budget, in where that actually makes more sense for them to purchase over renting just because they actually need better gear? Like, how do you assess some of that when it's a true technology need versus just a supplemental need?
When it's a technology need, we just look at how old the equipment is that they have versus what's out that can actually make their system better. And when I'm consulting, I try to advocate for them to buy the best they can for the money that they have. And I'll ask, okay, what's the biggest event you guys have done? How many channels of wireless do you use, or if it's wired? And we just work backwards from there. We help them put together a budget to present to the church leadership and say, hey, here's what we need based on what we've done in the past 2 years. And here's where we've fallen short. And then just have a plan A and plan B, because we all get a yes or a no. It's just a bigger yes or a bigger no. So you have to be flexible when you get the answer that you want, or sometimes you don't get the answer that you want. But I think Josh does the same thing and try to advocate for purchasing the right gear for that church, because some people can afford the Accent Digital, some can afford the SLX, but just finding them the right pieces of equipment is always that's how I advocate for those churches.
Cool. Josh, anything to add on that?
No.
That's okay. That's a totally acceptable answer. And speaking of budgeting, just a couple quick points. Don't want to belabor this, but I know this is sometimes because I grew up in this as a kid, where you had budget, buying technology was kind of like purchasing sheetrock and the bricks. Like, oh, we bought it one time, we never need to touch it. Why do we need a brand new wireless mic? We just bought one 20 years ago. Yeah, well, you need to fix the dropouts. And it's like, well, it's actually because the technology, at that point, they're like, oh, okay, so I guess we need a new one. When talking budgets, just kind of a couple quick points, and I know you've kind of covered a couple of them, but in preparing yourself and your information from a technology side and how you lay that out so that, again, kind of like in a previous comment about your, leadership and administration, and sometimes creative folks don't always understand the technical aspects. And so having to lay that out from a financial standpoint, or laying it out on a needs and a justification of why, what are some of the things that you help coach folks on, so that they're confident, as well as they understand how to communicate to folks that see technology more as an expense rather than an investment of facilitating, the end goal of a great experience?
I tend to meet with vendors first, and I never promise a vendor one dime. I just tell them, hey, this is what I'm looking to do. And I get real life numbers from a vendor and say, hey, this is what we're thinking we're going to be able to do. And we've been told no. When it comes to the leadership, when they ask why we need to do X, Y, and Z, and I just remind them, hey, everybody has a new cell phone every 2 years because technology changes. We don't need to buy things every 2 years, but here's what we need to do. Here is why we need to do X, Y, and Z. And then I ask, well, why does it cost this? And we don't set the prices. And so we try to get the best bang for our buck. And I mean, when we did our last big wireless purchase, it was a 2-year process for us just to put everything in place before we even presented it, because we wanted to make sure we were putting together everything. I mean, when it came to buying batteries versus buying rechargeable batteries, and what's our return on investment for buying the docks and buying the right docks and everything. And it's taken years for us to gain that trust with our leadership, because they don't really care about the batteries necessarily, but why do we need to spend X amount of dollars on a rechargeable battery when you can buy something from Amazon but it's not the same thing? And trying to explain to them all those things without getting over their head. And here is the industry standard and excellence, if that is the goal. Here's the best way that we can be excellent with the tools that we have. And we also don't use it as a crutch when we can't get what we want. We still have to we still need to accomplish the goal. And so there's sometimes where we have to, we need to cut the budget for this room to accommodate the bigger picture for the bigger room, knowing that down the line we can go back and fix room B.
Mm-hmm.
And so and we'll have to talk to certain ministries and say, hey, we weren't able to update this room for this reason. However, here's our plan over the next 6 months to upgrade this thing. If we can't buy it all in one chunk, we can spread it out over 6 months out of our operating budget, or we have to wait another year to address that. And that happens often. Sometimes we get to know we just have to wait a year. Typically in churches, audio gets a priority over lighting. To them, lighting is turned on a light switch, and if the pastor's mic isn't working, sometimes it can be, a catalyst for us to get more things, but we try not to use that as our go-to to get things done, because then you lose leverage, because then it's always the sky is falling.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
and that's scare tactics never get you all the way.
Yeah, it's tempting to allow that thing that you've been keeping alive for 6 months to just fail, but no one will appreciate the 6 months you kept it alive when that happens.
When it's a fatal failure and it's done. Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, Mac, thanks for the good points on that. And that was, and a part of this discussion too is, how do we ramp up to get to this? And I think we've done a great job of kind of covering the bases of, assessing what we've got, when to purchase, when to rent, just kind of all of the conversations that are really important leading up to having a successful event. Because without all of those conversations and open communication and trust between all the teams, sometimes you can't pull off a successful event, or it's not exactly the experience or the delivery or the level of excellency that everybody wants. And so to kind of dig into this onion, wanted to kick it over here to Josh to talk about, in his experience, from the execution side, and you put together some great talking points, but just kind of kick it off to you to, once we've gotten through all this, you've gotten through the planning stages, we're now lining up, getting ready to begin rehearsals, or a couple days prepping for rehearsals. Just kind of what's your mentality as you go through that process, from the start of that rehearsal to the end of it?
Sure. The specifics about some of this stuff are not going to be relevant to everyone's setup, so I'll kind of just take an overview of things here. But presumably you're looking at adding some wireless channels to your setup. Either you're renting them or you're borrowing them from another room, or whatever. So we want to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to support that. So first off, with the antenna distribution, You may have a good antenna distro set up in your current rig. You may only be using one receiver because you only have one or two channels, and so you don't need antenna distribution currently. But what's important to look at is that you have your system optimized in its current configuration, because if it's marginally functional, adding 8 more channels to it's going to break it. So we want to make sure that we're using the right type of antennas, both for transmitters and receivers. Shure has some great literature to explain all of this stuff as to why one particular antenna is going to suit an application better than that, a different. You want to make sure that you've taken into account the locations of your antennas. If you're going to be having action that's happening outside of your normal performance space, i.e. off stage, out in the audience, up in the balcony, whatever, we want to make sure that we have infrastructure in place to cover that. And again, Shure's got some great literature that breaks all of this stuff down. So we just want to make sure that we thought through all of these things, both for receive antennas for our mics and also for our in-ears if we're utilizing in-ears. We want to make sure that we've got that antenna system set and ready to go. And that we are sure that we have enough inputs and outputs in the antenna distribution to accommodate the devices that we're bringing in. If not, we need to look at renting antenna distribution, which is no fun and hard to explain to budgetary people, that there's this another 4-figure line item on the invoice for something that doesn't seem necessary, but you're just going to have to explain to them why it is. So once we've kind of got that in place, we want to look at our spectrum coverage for our room. Again, if we have a marginally functional setup right now, adding channels to it is not going to help. So we want to make sure that everything that's already in place is running 100%. We want to do a fresh site survey using Wireless Workbench, scanning using one of our in-place receivers. Hopefully that's going to cover the frequency range of the gear that you're bringing in. If it's not, then you're going to need to get something that can scan that, because what we don't want to do is just have gear show up, plug it in, scan, and be like, oh, we don't have channels in this range. You know, you've already spent the money. So we want to look at, is the gear that we're bringing in going to play nice with what we already have? Meaning, is it going to integrate into the same antennas? Which at this point we may want to look at, as we often do at Second, do we want to even use our normal stuff for this extra performance? Do we want to retune our stuff that we're going to use on Sunday to pull off the Christmas pageant that's happening on Saturday afternoon? Or do we want to rent everything that we need for Saturday and have it running separately so we can just turn it off when it's time for church and know that all of our normal stuff is going to work? If you have a marginal RF environment like we do, where we're constantly running into problems with interference and noise floor, if you have the budget, this is a good way to go, to just kind of not put any of your stuff at risk if you only need a few channels or whatever to add to the inventory for the performance. And you may find that renting 4 more channels is not going to be as big of a deal as you think it is, especially if you have a good relationship with your local vendor like we do here, which is also very important, to get to know these guys and work with them, and they'll work with you. So we want to have that theoretical coordination done beforehand. We want to use Workbench. We want to have a show file built without actually having all the gear on hand, and we want to see that it works in theory. We want to maybe scan for some additional frequencies so we have some backups. And then we want to be prepared to have to make some adjustments, which having backup frequencies is helpful for that. If we're renting in-ears and we don't normally use in-ears, you may want to try to rent those in a completely separate range from your mics. That's helpful for spectrum management. Shure has some great in-ears that operate in the 900 megahertz range now that will play very nice with whatever mics you have installed. We want to make sure that we're set up to have everything networked together in Wireless Workbench. That means having network infrastructure, any kind of switches or cabling in place. because you're really going to be swimming upstream trying to get all of this stuff integrated without having Workbench. Workbench is an excellent tool for managing not only RF spectrum, but also some other things I'll get into here in just a second. The last thing we want to look at before we make our rental order or pull together our gear is batteries. We really recommend using the Shure rechargeable battery system. It gives you excellent performance and also accurate monitoring of battery levels, which takes a lot of stress off of the whole event. Okay, so we go to the next slide. Once we get everything in here, it's time to get it all set up and functioning properly. So first thing we're going to do is get everything hooked up and connected to Workbench to where we can see everything together. One of the nice things about Workbench, in addition to managing your spectrum, is it lets you manage lots of variables on the receivers and transmitters that would otherwise require endless little clicky buttons to menu dive to find these settings. Whereas we can go ahead and select everything in the inventory and set the output gain to 0 dB, set the RF transmit level where we want it, all of those things, and try to set up all of these mics or all of these receivers to have the same settings. That way we're not trying to figure out when we get in a sound check, well, why is this one so much louder than the others? Why is this one dropping out when the others aren't? So kind of normalize those settings, and then you can change them as needed. Ditto for the transmitters. It allows you to set IR presets. So when you sync your devices, it's going to set the offset to 0. It's going to set the power locks to on, all of that stuff. This will save you a ton of time. Label everything in Workbench. Label those receivers, label the transmitters so that they sync over IR, label your Dante channels if you're using Dante. Once everybody gets there, now is not the time to try to figure out what mic number 3 really is. We want to have it labeled. So RF coordination, I'm sure a lot of y'all are already pretty adept at this, but I know some of you may be coming from a situation where an integrator set up your wireless mics and you have never really had to mess with them. And so I'll just kind of go through a real quick coordination. We want to start off by muting all the transmitters or turning them off. So all the stuff that we're using is not active. We want to go into Workbench and locate our local TV channels, make sure that we're excluding those. We want to tune the mics first. This is how I like to do it. So I like to get all of my mics coordinated, locked, turned on. I like to set them out on stage, sort of spread out. Don't put them all in one big pile. We'll get to that in a minute. But spread them out on stage, see that they're all happy and functioning properly, and then with them all active, we'll scan for our ears and fill in the spaces, because it's not that the in-ears are not important, they are, but the mics are just more important because the audience hears those. So if we have any kind of marginal dropout situation, we prefer it to be on ears unless it's our most important performers. So really, in saying that, you need to look at the priorities of which mics are the most important, which mics are going to be the furthest away from the antennas and so might need a more stable frequency than others. Again, Workbench allows you to nominate which frequency is going to go to each device. And so just kind of think through that. And you may also find at this point that you need to rethink using wired mics for some things if it's just not going to work out, because there's no part that's so small that we can afford for it to fail. You may have a kid, that's 8 years old and has one line. Well, his grandma probably flew in from Florida to see that. And so it's important, even though it may not be that important to the show. There's no acceptable failures. So once we've got everything programmed, we're going to put on our mic and ear combinations for our actors, and we're going to walk around and we're going to talk to ourselves and see that it works. We're going to go out to their positions out in the audience. We're going to go further than we expect them to be, because RF performance is not going to be as great on show day as it is on testing day, just because you have audience in there and The world is not a perfect place. Sound check time. We want to recreate the show as much as possible. If we can get the actors in costumes, it's better to do that because we want to learn now that they can't put it on by themselves because of their costume, or that there's some kind of costume interaction that causes trouble. So we want to try to replicate the show as best we can. This might be hard because you may not be able to have all of your equipment available a week before. If you can, it is strongly recommended to do so, to try to approach your leadership from day one that, yes, the show is only 3 days, but we need all of this gear for 10 days because it takes 6 days beforehand to get it all working and rehearsed and everything. If you're showing up, your rental is showing up on show day, you're going to have a bad time, even if things go well. Let's see, we can go on the next slide. So, gear storage and prep stations. Organize, organize, organize. Everything super organized. We like to make a spreadsheet for everything that's got the name of the actor, the name of the part, the number of the microphone, the number of the in-ears. We want to label everything. We want to label the pack. We want to put a little cable label on the microphone. We want to label the in-ears. We want to label the buds. We want to put all of those together in one place. If that sounds like a big job, it is, and you should try to have a person to just do all of that if you can. It can be a volunteer. It doesn't require a huge amount of technical knowledge, but having somebody on your team that is only responsible for managing the physical assets, changing batteries, getting them to the actors on time, getting them back after the show, especially if you have 2 shows in one day. You may need to get that gear back quickly to get it recharged and reset to go. So try to find somebody that will take that on and charge them with just managing that the whole time. Again, batteries we talked about, the rechargeables are definitely superior to any other solution. And if you can have also Workbench will help you here and allow you to monitor your charge status. We have our guy that manages all this stuff has a laptop with Workbench running on it, and he can just look and see what's going on the whole time. He's also using the timeline function on Workbench, which is very useful, especially during setup and sound check, because it allows you to see there may be dropouts happening when the mics are muted or when you're not noticing them. And so we can go back and really see, hey, there's a problem here. When the guy walks over here, we lose him, without having to just have your eyes glued on the monitor the whole time. So changeovers, you're probably, if you're like us, you're going to have changeovers from show to show, and you're going to have changeovers from show back to church services. That may be completely different. Again, this is where having everything labeled is going to really set you up for success. You may find that if you're not able to have dedicated wireless gear for the show, that it may be useful to double up some transmitters. Maybe your handheld mics that your singers are normally using are going to be belt packs for the show. That's a great way to manage it. You may only need to rent belt packs instead of the whole unit. If you're doing that, of course, your mic manager guy here is going to save you again by pulling the batteries out of all of those secondary devices and making sure that you're not cross-talking during church service.
Hey, Josh,
and then having
for the people who may not know what cross-talking is, explain to them what cross-talking is.
Yeah, having two mics, 2 transmitters on the same frequency is going to cause you big trouble. It is impossible to use 2 mics on the same frequency. One will always defeat the other, and so you'll have sometimes bizarre sounding interference and dropouts and things that happen. Once you hear it once, you'll know it instantly in the future that there's another transmitter on the same channel. So maybe don't do that on your pastor's channel at all. Want to preserve those money mics, what we call money mics, the ones that are essential for services. That's the announcement mic, the pastor's mic, the worship leader's mic.
We've never done that years. We didn't do that before, have we?
No. Yeah. So, yeah, some of those things, for us, the pastor's mic channel is sacrosanct, and we don't fool with it for anything. It doesn't get repurposed for anything.
Yeah.
It is maybe for another pastor, but that's it. You can also, Workbench will help you out with this situation again too by allowing you to have separate show files where you can change the labeling quickly. You can change tuning quickly if you need to go back to, you can just save your show file before you start integrating your new gear, and then you can just easily revert back to it when it comes time to go back to your normal setup. So that's kind of the gear stuff and all of that. Again, Shure's got great literature that you can freshen up on any of this stuff if you need to about coordination and everything. The last thing really is working with talent. And this is going to be the most challenging thing, I think. It is for us, just because I think a lot of us in this business are probably a little better with gear than we are with people. But just real quickly, it's important to understand that most of the people involved in this production are going to be volunteers. They're people from your church congregation. They are probably super nervous about doing this and stressed out, more so than you are. Both of you may be operating outside of your comfort zone, but especially if this person is just a volunteer or maybe a singer in your church, they're going to need a little bit of deference and respect for that, and try not to make it harder on them. One way you can do that is don't rush through getting in-ear mixes set. Try to set aside a specific rehearsal time just for principals that are using in-ears, and take all the time in the world that they want to make sure that they're comfortable with that, because a lot of them have never done this before, never used ears before. I like to tell people using ears for the first time, it's kind of like scuba diving for the first time. You can do it. You will live through it. It will not feel natural or comfortable the first time. But, imagine now having to act for the first time and you're doing it underwater. That's kind of what these people are going to be doing. Don't expect them to worry about your mic, your pack. They're not gonna. It doesn't matter how experienced they can be professional actors in my experience. They will not check the placement of their microphone before they go on stage. That's your job or your mic wrangler's job. Don't expect them to work with you or meet you halfway on technical stuff, because they don't have the bandwidth for that under what they're trying to get done. You've got to meet them where they are. You just need to make up with that, with being proactive with mic management, with wrangling. And the last thing is, a lot of these are going to be kids. So take that and extrapolate it even further, that, I haven't met a professional child yet. They're all exceedingly unprofessional in every situation you put them in. So, and sometimes adults will be kids too, because like I said, they're having a hard time and they're struggling. They're doing something for the first time, just like a kid doing it for the first time. So we always want to try to remember that this is a ministry, that these people are doing this for reasons outside of earning a paycheck. And we want to try to help them achieve that, just like we do with our worship leaders on the weekend every week. That we're here to enable a vision that the church leadership has put together. It's not your place now to second guess that. You just need to try to, I like to tell young engineers that the kind of engineer we are is like the kind of engineers the Army has. The general says to build a bridge here. It's not your job to figure out another way to get the Army across. It's your job to get started on the bridge.
Yep. Power lock everything.
Yeah, power lock everything. And you see these pie tins here that we've got in the photo. Some people will tell you that that is sort of an old wives' tale. I don't believe it. I think they're useful. And if nothing else, it keeps things secure and in one place. So the idea behind the Pi 10s is to eliminate the problem that happens when you put a bunch of wireless mics right together and they're all transmitting. They will create outsized harmonic products by virtue of them being so close together. That will cause interference in unexpected ways because those harmonic products may fall outside of what Workbench was considering when it gave you your coordination. So these are cheap at the dollar store. If they don't work, if you don't think they work, send me an email. But I think they seem to be pretty useful in my experience.
Awesome. Josh, thank you. And that is, man, talk about a great note to end on there with working with talent. Sometimes we totally forget that we're under a lot of pressure, personal and perceived pressure of pulling off the best that we can do and focused on our part. And that, you know, the talent and the other folks and the other volunteers that are there to do their part of it too. You know, they're the ones that have to stand in front of the mic. They're the ones standing in front of the audience, having to play their part. So just giving grace and, you know, serving it the best you can on all sides of the tech. That is an awesome way to wrap that up. I know, Cheryl, we are at time. She hadn't given me the hook yet. I think we've got really just all we wanted to wrap up with after this. You know, Josh did a great job of covering Wireless Workbench. It's a free tool. And by the way, this is something that even if you don't have all Shure gear, if you've got a mix and match of, you know, whether it's AT or Sen or whoever, we coordinate equally with all of those. So this is something that even whether you've got 2 or 3 channels or 50 channels, this is something that you can use to help verify that you've got, you know, a proper coordination within the current setup, within your current RF environment as it stands today. The nice thing is with some of the other wireless products that we've got in some of the other product options, you do have the ability to network into Wireless Workbench, which means you can actually pull through a live scan of that spectrum, which are those little blue bars that you see there. So again, you got a built-in scanner with some of your product. And with that, Cheryl, didn't know if we had any questions left. There's some of the product that was talked about. Some of those, you know, SLXD up to AD has scanning capabilities built into it as well. And again, kind of to what they talked about, what you can afford as well as the RF environment you're in will sometimes dictate, the environment will sometimes dictate which product you need to purchase based on how much spectrum you actually need for the number of channels that you need to have up and functioning every week. So with that, I'll kick it over to you, Cheryl. Oh, I think you're muted. Yeah, I know the button on the side.
All right. Yes. Lots of fantastic information. We just have a couple of questions here. So we'll get through those. I know we're a little over time, but these will be in the recording. So if you got to jump off, you can check out the recording to get these answers. So first question, and I know you kind of talked about this a little bit, gentlemen, but what suggestions do you have for getting the worship committee and creative team to be on the same page the day of the event, even if we're having weekly meetings?
I think before you get into rehearsal, just get a quick powwow. I mean, we put together, it's a quick Word document of the timeline, like, hey, from 6 to 6:30, it's literally kid wrangling. If we're micing up kids, we just want to just mic up the kids, no music happening, just trying to make sure everybody's on the same page, day of, just a quick powwow. And it doesn't always stick to schedule, but at least everybody knows there's a framework that we're all trying to work within. We know sometimes tech doesn't work or sometimes somebody's running late, but the more you can just get with people, just a quick text message, hey, are we still on point for this? And give people grace when it doesn't stick to that, even though tech, we don't get as much grace as the other people. Give the grace when you can, and certain things have to happen at a certain time, and be willing to ask, hey, I need 10 extra minutes on the back end. So if somebody has to leave, can I get this one person to stay so I can work with them on their specific need?
Okay, Great advice. Thanks, Mac. All right, next question, more of a technical Shure question. How does Wireless Workbench communicate with or get information from the microphones?
So based on which product you have, there is an actual Ethernet port on the back of, if you have SLXD, QLXD, ULXD, Axient Digital, even if you've got the old UHFR still hanging out, or PSM 1000, our personal monitoring system, that is just it's basic data stream, and the Wireless Workbench application, when you download it, you simply adjust your NIC settings to match the NIC that's plugged into that same switch as those devices, and then that will auto-populate as long as you've got the same IP settings. So if it's on a DHCP, or you have all your devices set up on a static IP, you just simply set your NIC to match that IP configuration. And then once they auto-populate into Wireless Workbench, that's where you can do all of your coordination and heavy lifting. So it's really that simple. And if you do have some other Shure devices that are non-networked, you can go in to the devices tab and actually add those in. So you can actually do a full coordination with network Shure devices, non-network Shure devices, as well as non-Shure devices that you're using.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate too, because the person asked more deeper, they're talking about BLX4R. So yeah, for those that are networked, it's all, streamlined, it's through the network, it's all good. For anything that's not networked, like a BLX system, you're just gonna have to do it manually. So you can enter in all the parameters manually into Wireless Workbench. It'll give you the frequency coordination. It'll tell you, all right, these are the channels you need to put these microphones on, and then you would just go manually onto those microphones and manually enter in those frequencies. So did I get that right, Michael?
Yes, and as Cheryl mentioned earlier, we have a ton of other webinars, YouTube videos on Wireless Workbench that will show you how to walk through that. If you've not done it before, download the software, go over to SAI, or to you can even Google Shure Wireless Workbench, and you'll find a ton of short videos that will show you how to walk through that inventory tab and add those.
And if you go through all of those trainings and you still can't figure it out, or you get stuck on something, we have a fabulous group of application support engineers on staff here. You can go to shure.com/contact. Again, that's shure.com/contact. And you can open up a ticket with that support team. And they are just a fantastic group of guys and gals that can answer all sorts of great questions. So shure.com/contact. And then just sort of a question, I know you mentioned it, Michael, but somebody was asking, does Workbench work with SLXD? And it does work from a network perspective, correct, Michael?
Yes.
Great. All right, and then I think we just have time for one more question here. Could anybody give a suggestion for a versatile and cost-effective RF scanner, like my first RF scanner?
Like if your Shure gear is not sufficient already, because as we mentioned, your Shure receivers are scanners built in. I like the RF Explorer. I have an RF Explorer that I use in situations where it's either mostly not Shure gear, or it's a very mixed, and I'm going to need to kind of handle everything in a third-party way. And those are pretty inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you. And just once again, I want to thank you, Josh and Mac, for joining us today and all your expert advice and information. Just lots of great stuff to digest here. And we want to thank everybody for joining us on the webinar today. We hope you learned a little something. I know I sure did. And we hope to see you on the next one. Have a fabulous day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.